3.14159265389793268462643. Well, my inner child is jumping with joy at your reaction just there because, well, when I was 11, I decided that I would try to memorize the mathematical constant of pi. 8327950288419716939393751 37510. I found a list of the first few hundred numbers in my dad's copy of Ripley's Believe It or Not Almanac. And I decided, as this little kid, to try and remember as many as I could, 15 numbers at a time. 58209749445923078164062862089862089862088998662. Well, that's the first 83. I got up to 115 before I got bored. But the reason that I did this was that, deep down, I really wanted people to think that I was smart. My obsession with numbers moved on, but it moved on to facts. I took fact books out of the library, and I started to use some of my allowance to buy old copies of the Guinness Book of World Records. In fact, this is my collection on my teenage bedroom shelf. And I would read the pages like they were textbooks. I would try to memorize what I found on each one. The deepest part of the ocean is 6.83 miles below sea level. The tallest man who ever lived was 8 foot 11 inches high. The shortest horse in existence is only 17 inches tall. I would share this trivia with, well, the few friends I had as a kid. To be honest, walking around the schoolyard reciting pi doesn't get you many friends as a kid. But actually, it didn't matter so much to me because I felt that I had this knowledge that other people didn't have. And this desire to gain knowledge and then to share it and to have people think I'm smart, well, these have been constant themes throughout my life. To be listened to for what people think you know, well, this feels powerful. And yet, as I got better and better at it, I slowly came to realize that although I knew a lot of facts, there was a lot that I didn't know. When I went to college, I got involved in the college newspaper. Now, this gave me an audience much bigger than just the kids in the schoolyard. Now I had 20,000 students and staff paying attention to what I was saying. I became the editor of the newspaper, and I'd moved on from trivia. I decided that I would try to give voice to the voiceless. So I interviewed people who worked in a 24-hour supermarket. I also spoke to the staff and clients of a homeless shelter. And doing work like this helped me get a highly prized internship at the Times of London. This was 1999. And the Times was, well, still is, seen as one of the places with the most smart people in the country. On my second day, I followed people into a meeting room, and I ended up in a discussion about what to put on the cover of that week's technology section. The main theme was that people were placing bets on this new thing called the internet about the biggest horse race in the country. I had an idea. How about, I said, speaking up from the back, how about horses jumping over a laptop? The editor kind of looked at me and went, yes, you. Good idea. Well, let's do that. And then he told me to write a short article for the section as well, talking about all the other things people were placing bets on. And so I did. And there's the cover. 1999, the Times of London, horses jumping over a laptop. And inside was my first byline. I was 21 years old, a college student, and they had a national newspaper headline. It was addictive. I was hooked. So I kept writing, and I learned how to write like a journalist, to be fair and neutral and objective. I decided that this was something that would be a great career move for me. So after graduation, I started to write for some of the biggest journalism brands in the country. I was writing for The Guardian, I was writing for the Wall Street Journal, and I kept on writing for The Times. I had an audience. I was getting to share the information I knew. And also, I was getting to talk to people who I admired. I could interview artists, and I could interview writers and comedians and movie stars and musicians. Also, I could call up leading scientists and say, "I'm calling from The Times," or "I'm calling from Wired magazine." And they would stop what they were doing, and they would take the time to talk to me. This was an incredibly strange and powerful feeling, people wanting to know what I knew. The truth is, however, that a lot of these subjects, most of them in fact, I didn't know anything about them when I actually started. I mean, when I started to write the piece, I would do some research, I would call up an expert or two, and I would also find, usually via friends or maybe a quick Google search, I would find somebody who represented one of the groups affected by the story and get a quote or two from them. And then I would write it up as if I had been the expert on this subject for years. So I was 26 by this point, a journalist with nationally recognized platforms. I felt that this was because, well, I'd built a reputation, because I had a particular tone, because I had this knowledge, because I was smart. That may or may not be true. I had succeeded in making my voice louder. But what I hadn't really understood was that my voice was a lot louder than other people's to begin with. In 2004, the writer Arundhati Roy gave a speech in Sydney, Australia. She started to talk about this idea of giving voice to the voiceless. And what she said early on in her speech was this: that there is no such thing as the voiceless. There is only the deliberately silenced or the preferably unheard. I'd found it pretty easy to become a journalist, to be honest. My obsession with facts, well, that had been nurtured by my father, who's a doctor, and my mom, who's a teacher turned homemaker. My private schools had continued that encouragement, and I'd been on the debate team and learned how to structure an argument. All of my education, pretty much all of my reading, had come from people who looked and sounded like me. When I walked into that room at the Times, nobody gave me a second thought, because I was just another white man in the room. I grew up in a body that British culture said looked like that of a professional. So when I said something, people treated me respectfully. They think I might be able to say something smart, because that's what they expect, even if that isn't something smart that I've just said. Study after study confirms that if I were a transgender person, if I were a woman of color, if I were Native American, if I had a very obvious physical disability, then my work and my body and my words would be scrutinized in a very different way. I would struggle to make my physical and cultural context not to be part of the consideration of my arguments. I would also only very rarely hear voices like mine reflected in mainstream culture. Let's look at journalism as an example. The American Society of News Editors states that minorities make up 37% of the US population, but only 12% of people who work in the news. Women are more than half of the population of this country, but only 38% of the newsroom, and very few people in leadership positions. And that has changed almost not at all in the last 14 years. When we don't open ourselves up to diverse voices and have a diversity of voices and experiences in the room, then we miss out on things, and we also bear the risk of being oppressive and also of making costly mistakes. Let's take a really simple example. Apple stores. They're beautiful spaces, and they're incredibly optimized, like their devices, for what their particular function is. And their function is aesthetics and commerce. And every part of them, every inch, is optimized to achieve this. Except in some stores. And in some stores, the area underneath their beautiful glass staircases is blocked off. Why is that? Well, it turns out that Apple hadn't really considered that it's one thing to have beautiful pseudo-invisible staircases, but women in skirts are not very excited about walking up them. When we don't open ourselves up to a diverse range of voices, we don't know what we don't know. I'm completely with Donald Rumsfeld on this. Unknown unknowns, they're dangerous. So the message that I'm going to speak on for the rest of this talk, what I'm trying to say is something that is, well, it's a very simple message, and it's going to seem like an entirely contradictory one. I am standing up here before you to say that people like me who have a platform, who are listened to, we need to stop talking. Stop talking about all the things that we think we know. Stop talking about how we have all of the answers. Stop talking so we can learn how to listen. Now, this is a very simple message. I believe it does make the world better. But to be honest, it is the hardest thing I have ever had to do. It's really hard for me because everything that I have learned, everything that I have been rewarded for, tells me to do the opposite. My commentary is part of my value. What I think, what I see as a journalist, is how I make my living. I am the eyes and the ears of the unseen audience. I am rational. I am objective. I'm not objective. I can't be. However great that ideal might be, I can only see things through the eyes of a white, middle-class, British person from a fairly wealthy background. That's who I am. If I could understand something different, if I could get other kinds of voices, well, it wouldn't necessarily be about me getting them, but maybe the audience could be served in a more complete way. When I stop talking, when I try to listen, sometimes I come across voices and texts that are in a tone that I find very difficult. I find it rude sometimes, or offensive, or inappropriate. I have to really focus on trying to stop myself from reacting to that, and focus on the content and not the tone. Focus on the content and not the tone, because how would my voice sound if it had been consistently not listened to or spoken over just because of my gender or because of the color of my skin? How would I feel if I felt that I had something important to say, but nobody would listen to me because of who I am? How loud would I try to shout to compensate? How angry might people say I am when all I'm trying to do is be heard? That's why I believe that one of the most important things I can do is to stop talking and to take a seat and to listen. And it's really hard, because every time I hear something interesting, that little kid wants to jump up and say, I've got a new thing, I've got a new fact, listen to me. And then when there's something I don't understand, I want to say, hey, I'm a journalist, pay attention to me, listen, what's going on? But I need to stop that. I need to hold back. And it's doubly difficult to hold back right now, because the way the internet works is that it encourages me to keep talking. We're in an age now where we have all these incredible metrics about speech. They tell us how many clicks we get, how many links, how many retweets, how many followers do I have today, how many followers will I have next week. And these numbers encourage us to say more outrageous things, to share every piece of information we learn instantly, to try and become the fount of all knowledge, because being listened to is addictive. The numbers can be useful, but we can't treat them as the reward itself. If we do, or if I do, well, then I'm back to hoping that a long string of numbers might make me sound smart. I will never learn all of the facts that are out there on the internet. I will never be smarter than everybody else in the room put together. No matter how many numbers of pi I try to memorize, I can never learn them all. And when I stop talking and listen, I don't just gain new facts, although those are nice, but really, what I gain is a new sense of thinking and a new sense of seeing. For example, a lot of people who I started following on Twitter were using the word cis, C-I-S. I had no idea what it meant. I had to hold back from saying, hey, you people having this conversation, come pay attention to me, tell me, what are you talking about? It's not up to people, especially who feel like their voices are not being heard, to have me interrupt their conversation and ask them to take the time and energy to be my teacher. So I stopped, and I stepped back, and I looked things up, and I did some reading. I learned from Wikipedia, and also from a great article called A Call for Cisgender Action by a woman called Lorraine Canavisto, a person called Lorraine Canavisto, I'm sorry. And I learned from that article that cis, well, what it refers to is a person whose gender identity themselves matches the physical body that they were born in or that they were assigned to. So, well, let me give you a better example. That sounds quite jargony. I am a cis man, and I'm a cis man because I was assigned at birth to what we call a male body, and I identify with a male gender. So another variant, aside from cis, could be transgender. It's a whole spectrum of different identities. Now, why is this word important? What does it matter? Well, it matters because to not have a word like this, it's like the white male tone being the neutral and objective and rational one. It's to say that everything else is different, but this thing doesn't require description. And so people use this term in order to remind themselves and everybody all the time that there is a variance of identities that people have in this world. And so just from simply hearing a word and looking it up, my whole way of understanding the world and how people are experiencing it has expanded. The next thing I had to stop myself from doing is saying, hey, everyone, I know this thing called cis. Here, come, I'm going to write an article about it and tell you all about it. I also had to stop myself from just casually dropping it into a tweet. You know, I know. Yeah, I'm in that group. I know. If I tried to become the voice of it, if I tried to just casually create that as something that I owned, well, I would be repeating the exact sins that Arundhati Roy talked about. I would be taking from a group who see themselves as marginalized, and then I would be taking it away from them and leaving them on the edges. And so instead, what I try to do is I try to share my platform with expert voices on different ideas. I try to share my platform because, yes, I've been granted this extra volume, but by sharing it, it doesn't diminish anything of me or what I'm trying to do either. And maybe, just maybe, I can share some of that amplification. Offline, that means trying to hire and meet and commission a more diverse range of voices. Online, it's as simple as a retweet or a click or a copy-paste. You know, these actions, they don't make the world a better place on their own. It doesn't suddenly make everything fair and equal. But it's the start of a journey, and a journey to try and share the experiences that other people have, the ways that they see this country, the way that they see the world and their own worlds around them in a different way. And it's really not hard to start. Next time you read a story about a group that you don't identify with, don't just finish with the 1 or 2 line quote that they've been given. Seek out more voices, more experiences from that perspective. You can do it using Google and Twitter and YouTube. You can also seek out sources themselves of more diverse voices, such as Global Voices, or Racialicious, or Model View Culture. There's a hashtag, Saturday School, created by Professor Rhonda Ragsdale. All of you here today have come and sat down and been incredibly considerate listeners. You've been hearing from a very wide range of experiences and voices up here today. And you've listened and you've come here because you want to be inspired. What would it look like if you treated the rest of your life like TEDxAtlanta? How would it be if you sought out even more diverse experiences than you are right now, more diverse ones than you come across in your daily life, and you addressed them with the same curiosity, the same excitement, the same desire to understand? I don't memorize facts from the Guinness Book of World Records anymore. I'm no longer trying to memorize all the numbers of pi. Though I do care what people think of me, I'm not really worried about sounding smart. To be honest, it's actually quite easy to sound smart if people give you an audience, a platform, a microphone, and you have a British accent. Not everybody gets a platform and a microphone. Not everybody gets listened to, period. If we can remember that fact, and if we can try to change it, well, that sounds smart. Thank you very much.